All right, guys, we're just about ready to get started. We're going to take care of some technical issues for the first minute or so, so make yourselves comfortable. Light your pipes, pour yourselves your ales, and then we'll start chatting. Our greetings to you guys who have been waiting patiently for us to get started. Here we are. All right, so I want to introduce you guys to a buddy of mine. We've known each other for years, and then he betrayed me and moved away. We embarked in many projects together and have many epic stories to tell, most of which will not make it onto this video. But John Ellis, why don't you say hello?
Hello. Thank you for having me. I've missed hanging out.
Yeah, dude. It's been hard times since you left. I'll be honest.
I cry a lot.
It's all right, dude. I know that. I know that I'm the giver and you're the taker in our relationship. So what are you drinking?
I am drinking a Dogfish Head India Brown Ale. I was up at the brew pub earlier and got a growler. So.
Very nice.
Yeah. One of the perks of living up here instead of down there. So.
Yeah, you do have a better beer scene. I'll admit that. I, however, am drinking an excellent beer.
Oh, yeah.
This is the Yeti Imperial Stout.
Okay. Very good. Great divide.
So, for all you guys who are watching, first of all, to you guys who have been waiting and chatting a little bit in the YouTube chat room, welcome. Thank you. We would actually love to know, and it's my fault, I'm in kind of a noisy place, if the camera is flashing back and forth a lot, just a lot, too much, not following the speakers necessarily, let me know. But also, comment please either on the YouTube channel, so on the link, or on the link to the YouTube video, or hit us on Twitter. I'm at Joffrey the Giant. So Joffrey the Giant on Twitter. Drop your comments, drop your questions. John, where can they hit you?
A day in his court. A day in his court. So.
Okay, not a day in his courts, his singular court.
Court.
Right on. Well, I didn't want to have this discussion about Christians and smoking the marijuana without smoking my pipe. Here we are on a dedicated pipe smoking channel. You know, I occasionally get comments, just random viewers. I probably have many viewers who actually do smoke pot, but they're not idiots.
Yeah.
But I do get occasional idiots who just wander past my channel and have to drop a comment like, hey, it's 420, or I love smoking pot. It's like, dude, I just did a review of Peterson's Old Dublin. You know, have a little respect. So I can't wait for those guys to stumble across this video, 3 months from now. Well, let's get right to this thing. Okay, let's hit the question about Christians smoking pot. You wrote an article. I read it today. I absolutely loved it. I posted it to Joffrey the Giant. I've been getting actually quite a bit of feedback. I think you've seen some of those comments.
Yeah.
So we're gonna dive into this in more detail. But what is the general thrust of this article?
Well, friends of mine and friends of yours as well who know my past will occasionally and more frequently now ask me about my position, what I think about Christians smoking marijuana, if it's okay. And so I decided to write this, sort of put my thoughts down. And the general thesis is, my thesis is that under most circumstances, the recreational use of marijuana is out of bounds for the Christian. And in the article, I don't know how much you want to go into the ins and outs here, but in the article, my main point is that Christians who take the biblical attitude towards drunkenness, which is a negative attitude at best, with some possible strictures to drunkenness, Christians who take that seriously have to account for that if they choose to smoke marijuana, because with marijuana you get high or you don't get high, and if you don't get high, there's no reason to smoke it.
So you're pretty much equating getting high with getting drunk. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I say in the article too, in one of the footnotes, that high equals drunk. And it's not that being high on marijuana is the same thing as being drunk from alcohol. But that being said, being high from marijuana isn't the same kind of high as being high from cocaine. But it's about a change in your physiology, about how the neurons are firing differently, things like that. So, but high equals drunk.
All right, so let's unpack that. Let's talk a little bit. You developed this in the article, but let's just go ahead and take that. Let's talk about alcohol, being drunk, getting drunk, and drunkenness.
Yeah.
All those things. Let's talk about that in Scripture.
Okay. One of the things that kind of actually surprised me when I wrote this article, and this is one of the reasons why it ended up being twice as long as I intended, is that when I got into it, I found out that there was no absolute command to not get drunk in the Old Testament. And I had always operated under the assumption that there was, but taking that into context of cultural things, I mentioned in the article about how when the Greeks came into the area, they were appalled at the constant state of inebriation that the people groups in that region lived in. People were constantly drunk. And so in the Old Testament, you have these passages about drunkenness, about the covenant people, and they're always negative, almost always negative in regards to drunkenness. And so my take on that is that it would have been incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for the covenant people in Israel to completely abstain from ever getting drunk, considering the culture they live in. Actually, sorry, go ahead.
I think that there's also the aspect of God commanding the people of God to buy wine, to buy strong drink, which is beer, as much as their heart desired, and to feast and to rejoice. So there's an aspect of rejoicing which you can't really, when you're talking about alcohol and rejoicing, you're talking about some sort of what you call the physiological effect. You're talking about alcohol having some kind of impact. And I think there's an aspect of this. I think it can be hard for people to believe that an entire people or an entire region of the world could be basically drunk all the time. But there's actually been a lot of scholarship on that. A lot of what led up to the prohibition was, Americans drank way too much liquor, hard liquor, in the 19th century. So that many, you could say that Americans were always drunk. Look at Russians and vodka. There's a community of Finns that lives here in Greer. They are kind of a religious, or these separatist Lutherans. But their big moment, the reason they exist, is that some Finnish Lutheran guy stood up in the 19th century, called himself an apostle, and said, "You shall not drink too much vodka." And it changed their lives because they were drinking too much vodka as a people. The British were said by many contemporary sources in the Middle Ages, I say the British, I mean the English, to be drunk all the time, just to be constantly on a low-level buzz because they were drinking beer all the time.
And something else to add to that, prior to the beer purity laws, which I know you're familiar with, a lot of the ingredients that were put into alcoholic drinks had hallucinogenic properties as well. And there's some scholarship that says that one of the reasons for the beer purity laws is that the Lutherans in Germany recognized one thing, that there was a difference between beer that was brewed with those three ingredients and the beer, like especially from Belgium, that had a lot of those hallucinogenic plants in them, the way people responded after they drank them. The hallucinating prompted a level of licentiousness that just normal beer didn't. So there's some pushback on that. That's not necessarily a given. I know that I've read some scholarship that suggests that.
And we're going to try as much as we were able in this video, and if we neglect to, drop a comment if you really want to know. We're going to try to back up and footnote things that we claim in this video. So feel free, if you don't see that pop up in the next couple of days, drop a comment at us. By the way, everyone, welcome to those of you who are joining us and who are dropping comments. So now let's talk about, okay, so I guess we haven't really quite unpacked drunkenness. We established that the Israelites drank a lot, for good and for ill. Now let's talk about what being drunk and what drunkenness might mean, and what God thinks of drunkenness, according to Scripture.
Okay. Before I do that, I'm going to back up briefly to the footnote thing. I'm actually working on an article right now about alcohol content in the Bible, an article for that. And so I didn't source some of the stuff I wrote about alcohol in this article because, for one thing, I didn't want to steal my own thunder. So, but as like you said, I'm actually working on something where some of these things that I'm saying, I will actually source and provide footnotes and cite the authority, primary sources and secondary sources.
Okay.
Not some long-haired ex-pothead's opinion. Now, in regards to drunkenness, here's one of the things too that was interesting about writing this article. I don't know if I'm qualified to make a hard and I know I'm not qualified to make a hard and fast rule about what drunk means for each and every person. I will say this, that because of the blessings of God allowing us to live in the 21st century, drunk means something different to us than it would to the Israelites. And that's one of the things that I tried to reflect in the article about the culture. And we recognize we have more of a transcendent understanding of science and physiology and medicine than the Israelites did. And so we have a greater understanding of the physical harm that being drunk entails. And so I don't think that a Christian today can use the excuse that, well, I mean, the Israelites, maybe they were drunk more than most preachers would be willing to acknowledge. That makes it okay for me, because it's a different day and age. And so I think that in 2015, drunk is a closer line, is a harder drawn line than it was 3,000 years ago.
All right. Well, so speaking of lines and gray areas, let's talk about what it might mean to be drunk, to get drunk, and to be a drunkard. Because I think that do not be given to drunkenness, which is the injunction in the New Testament, probably is referring to, don't be given to drunkenness. Don't be drunk regularly. Don't be a drunkard. And you unpack some of that in your article. By the way, to all of you all, both an older article I wrote about Christians and pot smoking, and then John's article, which we'll be referencing constantly throughout this, they're both linked to below this video. But so let's unpack being drunk, getting drunk, and being a drunkard.
Yeah. I have been drunk once, just for the sake of context. I've been drunk once in the last 10 years, I think, and that was by accident, because I was doing a concert review and I wasn't paying attention to how much I was drinking. You're a large guy. I'm not as large a guy as you, but I'm not a small guy. So the amount of alcohol it would take for you and I to be drunk is different than other people. And I got to be honest with you, Joffrey. I'm not really sure what you're asking me in terms of like, what is it, in terms of being drunk. I mean, I know the science behind it, because I had to take a class to bartend in the state of Florida about alcohol. And the average size man, it takes 4 drinks an hour to reach the legal alcohol limit, and 1 drink an hour after to sustain it. Average size woman, it's 3 drinks. But I'm not sure if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. No, it's not. So what I'm actually asking is, it must mean something different for you getting drunk by accident. You're writing. Yeah. You're writing for several hours. You're sipping on some beer, and you drink too much. We can argue about whether that's a sin or not, but that is something different than the church elders have to come to me because I'm about to lose my job, and my family is miserable because I am always drinking.
Yeah. Oh, there's a big.
In that case, I'm a drunkard, and that's a different thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I even mentioned in the article about how if somebody came to me, if a friend of mine came to me and said, "I can't wait to get drunk tonight," I would have some questions for them.
Right.
And if they were an elder in my church who said that, most likely, I would be looking. My family and I, we would be looking for a new church, because there's a difference between occasionally having too much to drink, as you're saying, and constantly pursuing that drunken state. I'm in the fortunate position, even in my past, when I was a thoroughgoing debauched atheist, where I didn't like being drunk, so I was never drunk. I could probably count the number of times I've been drunk in my life on two hands. I just don't like it. I've never liked it. But there is a big difference between, like as you're saying, being characterized by constantly being drunk, and the person like me, who a year ago was at a concert for a job and wasn't paying attention to how many beers I had.
So, that distinction that we've just drawn is going to come back into play when we're speaking more directly about pot. But before we do that, let's bridge between alcohol and marijuana.
Yeah.
As I smoke my delicious pipe, by talking about Christian liberty. So, do I have the liberty? Do I have the freedom to drink, to smoke a pipe, to smoke pot? What does Christian liberty look like? A thing that I think all of us both of us and most people who are watching this video will agree that Christian liberty is a concept that is easily abused by young Christians especially, and young Christian men, thunder puppies, who they know that you can't point to a verse and tell them to stop being, you can't say behavior X is the behavior of a fool. You can't make a law. God made no law, therefore I have Christian liberty. But really, the whole time, they're being assholes.
Yeah.
Right? So that happens a lot. But let's talk about Christian liberty, and let's use that to move out of alcohol into marijuana.
Okay. The concept of Christian liberty, especially in 21st century America, has been so perverted by a perverted understanding of rights theory that when most people start talking about liberty and rights, they automatically lose some intellectual I'd lose some respect for them intellectually, because what they're talking about is my right, this selfish sense of rights, as opposed to how my liberty and my rights support the community, specifically my family and my church. And so somebody who wants to argue they have Christian liberty to smoke marijuana, I'm going to ask them the questions that I did in the article. Okay, well, so how do you handle the negative attitude in the Bible to drunkenness, and some of the passages that actually come really close to flat out saying Christians, flat out saying actually that Christians shouldn't be characterized by drunkenness. But so how do you handle that? And then why are you smoking marijuana? What's the liberty there?
Okay, so you had an anecdote to start your article, and I thought it was pretty illuminating. Will you tell that story?
Yeah. At the height of my weed smoking, and here's something interesting too that I didn't put in the article. When I was involved in the culture of marijuana, the only people who used the word pot were either narcs, or they were people who didn't smoke very often and didn't know what words to use. And so I don't know if that's changed or not in the intervening 11 years. So I always say weed. So one night, my roommate and I, we were smoking weed, and we got into an argument about why Captain Kirk has a larger stateroom on the USS Enterprise than the other crew members. And I have never watched a full episode of Star Trek. I had no idea what I was arguing about, but we spent over an hour arguing about this and consumed quite a few cheese puffs. And at the end of it, I couldn't tell you why we had argued about it or what had started it or what our objective was.
Why is that a bad thing, though? What's wrong with not remembering?
I don't necessarily. That's the thing. It's like one of the commenters on your Facebook referenced that. It said that I had confused correlation with causation.
Yeah. So let me read his comment. So he says, interesting, but I'm convinced he confuses correlation with causation. In the claim that people who smoke don't read, watch Cartoon Network or Comedy Central, eat cheese puffs, argue about trivial things, or can't remember the thought before last. Correlation is not causation. So what he's basically saying is just because this guy is a dumbass doesn't mean that he's a dumbass because he smokes pot.
Yeah, okay. Okay, one, I actually put this in the article and then I left it out, so I hope I don't insult this guy too much. But when I referenced the minor fallacy about appeal to authority, when I talked about why I was talking about my past, because I know what I'm talking about, I had this little blurb about how people who point out minor fallacies, the only thing they're really accomplishing is demonstrating that they had a philosophy 101 class in college, because minor fallacies are minor for a reason. They don't prove anything. They don't refute things. And so, first off, his thing about correlation and causation, the fact that I was arguing about Star Trek and eating cheese puffs was a direct cause of smoking weed. If I hadn't been smoking weed that night, I would probably have been reading Dostoevsky, because that was right at the time of my life where I was really starting to read Dostoevsky.
So hold on. So you're saying that in your experience, you know for a fact that that moment in your life, you were doing that stupid thing because you were smoking pot.
Yeah, and I know for a fact that that's the majority of people's experience. And even in the article, I don't say every single person that smokes weed is going to eat a bag of cheese puffs and watch Adult Swim. And when I was writing it, I knew, I'm actually still hoping this happens. I knew that there's the risk that somebody somewhere, and it's going to be a guy, it's always a guy, some guy is going to come on and comment and say, well, when I was in my MFA program, I read Moby Dick while I was high, and then I wrote a 5,000-word paper on it when I was high, and I got an A on it, and I don't care. That doesn't prove anything, because there's a reason that the producers at Adult Swim produce the kind of content they do. It's designed to appeal to the fact that people who are high on pot live in a world of non sequiturs. I was watching a family. I don't know if you ever watched Family Guy, but there's this one family. We used to watch Family Guy a lot when we were high. And there's this one Family Guy episode where I think they're in a courtroom, and the Kool-Aid guy, the big tub of Kool-Aid, jar, of Kool-Aid, he burst through the wall like he did back in the commercials in the 80s, like for no reason at all, had nothing to do with the plot. And that was the funniest moment to us. Like there was a whole room full of us high, and we almost choked to death laughing so hard at this non sequitur. And there's a reason for that, and the reason is because we had been smoking marijuana. So it was caused by marijuana.
So we're getting a little off track here, and I want to bring us back to your main thesis, which is that getting high is the same as getting drunk. Yeah. So we're going to unpack that. But first, I would like to continue the minor and even major fallacies by tossing out an ad hominem attack that you're suffering here in the comments.
Yeah, I see that from my friend Mark.
So this guy from... So Mark here is a friend of mine, an actual friend of mine.
Yeah, mine too.
I'm going to throw this at you. So I know people that live very successful lifestyles and are fantastic parents that smoke weed. Maybe it's just Southerners that cannot handle their weed. Hashtag Colorado smokes better weed. So before you answer, I will say, I want to say that although I would not say hashtag Colorado smokes better weed, I know such people as well. What have you to say about that?
I know such people as well, too. In fact, for a long time, I never got to the point where I wasn't that person. One of your commenters said something about how I overindulged, and that's true. I smoked far more weed than your average business person. But if you go back to the article, the point we're discussing now isn't the main leg of the argument. I understand there's an aspect of personal experience in that. If you go back and look at the article, the other argument is more important. Oh, I'm reading Mark's other comment. I love you, John, but I think you're basing your experience on all the swag, weed, and shake from the South. See, Mark, you're making the mistake of assuming that I was living in the South the whole time during that time. And I've lived quite a few places, and I've spent quite a bit of time in Colorado. And yes, you're right. Colorado does have great weed. I should know. So, yes, Mark, your constant harping on the South isn't going to work here because that doesn't apply in this situation. I got high plenty of times outside of the South. I love you, Mark. I love you too, Mark. So, what was I saying?
You were talking about how there is another leg to
too much weed
this.
in the past. My memory's gone.
Yeah, so let me put you back on track. Let the pure and virginal Joffrey the Giant lead you back to the right path. So, this point about people who do smoke pot but are responsible and successful is actually the perfect bridge to what we want to talk about, because you're claiming that getting high is the same thing as getting drunk. That there's no way for the two, those are the same thing, and we're going to definitely unpack that. But in that scenario, if that were true, that would mean that, because I know people who are not drunkards, they're not wastrels, but every Friday when they get their paychecks, they go out and they get drunk on purpose. So they get wasted that day. Are they at work on Monday? Yes, they are. Do they work hard? Do they provide for their families? Yes. But their outlet is one in which they get completely wasted. They lose their minds, whatever you want to say that is. They do that to themselves very temporarily. It is part of their lifestyle. But so, being a pot smoker who does not overindulge, as you put it, doesn't necessarily answer the, can it be that every time I decide to smoke pot, I am actually sinning? I am actually getting drunk, losing my mind, losing self-control. And we haven't really quite established yet, and this might not be the place, and we might not be able to do that conclusively, but that being drunk is actually a sin. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about now about the connection between being drunk and being high, and can you smoke marijuana without getting high?
Yeah, see, and that's where I hope that I don't think I came down too hard in this area in the article, too dogmatic. Okay, let me say this too. If I were to meet someone, let's say Mark. Let's use Mark.
Let's use Mark.
Let's say Mark tells us, guys, I have an incredibly stressful job, and from Monday through Friday, I have an incredibly stressful job, and when I get off work on Friday, I smoke a joint.
Right.
I may disagree with him. I may not. I may believe that that's not necessarily in bounds for him as a believer. But I'm not going to get worked up over it. I'm not really going to care that much. Does that make sense? Like I'm not going to say it's not like he's going out robbing liquor stores on Friday nights to relieve the stress. There's a difference there, and I recognize that. I didn't write the article to make a hard and fast law for everyone to say, okay, getting drunk is a sin and smoking pot is a sin. Well, what I'm saying is that I believe that being characterized by drunkenness, whatever that means, and like you said, we haven't fleshed that out yet, but being characterized by drunkenness is out of bounds for the Christian. And smoking weed equals, in my opinion, in my experience, and not just my experience, but also like in the article, I said in the article, I actually taught in a substance abuse course. In my experience and training, smoking weed is equivalent to being characterized by drunkenness, because unlike you and I are both drinking a beer, if we were smoking weed, we would get high. Otherwise, we've just wasted our money. We didn't waste our money on this beer if we don't get drunk.
Because it tastes delicious.
Yes.
So St. Paul tells us that anything that is not done through faith is sin. He also says that all things are licit, but not all things are convenient, or as more modern translations say, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about If it's not, I mean, if it's not what's best, I mean, I would actually think I think you can make a biblical case that beer and wine is best.
Yeah.
Now, so, but how does that work out with weed? Since I shouldn't say pot, or else I'm a narc.
Well, okay, going back to that passage from Paul, and you're more the theologian of between the two of us. But my understanding of that passage is that there's a bit of sarcasm from Paul there, because he's responding to Corinthians who are sleeping with their stepmother, right? And so they have this argument that, you know, we're free in Christ, we have the liberty to do this. And so there's a bit of snark in his response, because obviously not all things are lawful. Like if you were to plug in, I don't want to be too heavy, but it's like robbing liquor stores. Like, is there any believer that's actually going to argue that robbing liquor stores is lawful? Does the Bible actually say that these things are so to me that's the question is then I don't know if that's what Paul's saying. He's being sarcastic. He's saying to these people who think that sleeping with their stepmother is okay, that all things are lawful. Yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. All things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. Come on, get real.
Okay, so let me have a little point of clarification here then. Yeah, it is actually a quote. He's quoting someone else outside of Scripture, and that pops up twice in 1 Corinthians. The first time, it is about the scenario you're mentioning. So it is about sexual immorality, and he says, flee sexual immorality, and then he has that quote. But then it pops up later, and that's in the context of 1 Corinthians 10:31 saying, for whether you eat or drink, and whatever you do all things to the glory of God. Leading up into that, talking about animal sacrifices, and whether you buy from a butcher who is selling you meat that has been dedicated to God's. So the meat thing, and the meat question of 1 Corinthians is the go-to passage when Christians argue about Christian liberty in drinking and, of course, marijuana as well. So that's just a point of clarification.
Yeah, well, I mean, you live in the area of Greenville, South Carolina, and you have a lot of people around you who grew up in strict fundamentalism and this weird type of legalism, and I get the impulse to excuse certain behaviors with that, but then they take it too far, and they don't show any discernment in with everything, because all things aren't equal, and there are things we are bound in by certain things as believers. King Jesus expects certain things from us, and the whole narrative within the narrative of the entire Bible, drunkenness is portrayed negatively for the most part. There are those passages about wine gladdening your heart, but as opposed to smoking marijuana, beer can gladden my heart before I get drunk, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is my experience and my knowledge of it. I don't see how marijuana can gladden your heart unless you're high. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, you also had a commenter who deleted his comment about how he knows somebody. It's like Amway in these discussions. It's always, I know somebody. I know somebody who's going to get rich off of this. I know somebody who does one or two puffs a day, 1 or 2 puffs at a time, and that's it. Well, why is he only taking 1 or 2 puffs? He's wasting his money then if he's not getting high. There's no reason to smoke marijuana unless you get high.
So let's try to establish something a little more firmly then before we move to the next thing. Why is getting high bad? Let's try to answer that as plainly as possible. Why is getting high bad?
Why is it bad?
Yes. Why is it evil? Why is it a sin?
Well, I mean, that's not an answer that, I mean, it's not a question that I'm not to pun on this, but I'm not necessarily qualified to say, because I'm not saying either that from a personal standpoint that I think it's bad if someone gets high. What I know is that the Bible doesn't look favorably on drunkenness, because there are aspects. Okay, and James, not to there are aspects of being drunk that make it harder to enact with each other as image bearers. And I talk about this in an article with marijuana.
Okay, now hold on. I'm totally interrupting your flow, but that's exactly where I wanted to go next. This, I think, is the thing we need to unpack next. What do alcohol? Because this is, Christians who talk about their Christian liberty. This is their big focus. But then it's also those same arguments are then moved to marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the effect on Christian brotherhood, on Christian community, that alcohol and marijuana, you think, have.
Okay. Well, and this goes into the one commenter who said that I was confusing correlation and causation. This is the area where I talked about that. And I believe this, and I think this is an interesting point that a lot of people haven't considered. But when you're high, when you smoke weed, and also, too, if you want to even take it to alcohol, when you become drunk, when you become high, you start to withdraw into yourself. It's harder to commune with each other. And one of the things that I love about the Christian life is the ability to commune and fellowship with fellow believers, with brothers and sisters in Christ. And so I look for ways that reflect who God is that also encourage communion. And I think those things are actually the same thing. Something that reflects who God is going to encourage communion on one level or another. If I get high if I smoke weed and I'm high, and this applies to most people, and I'm not going to say all because I'm sure there's some guy who's written his thesis on Moby Dick while he was high and got an A on the paper. Bully for you, dude. But for most of us who smoke weed and get high, it's hard to listen to each other because our attention span has dropped excessively. And I talk about this in the article. This is one of the reasons why most potheads, when they're high, and I'm not talking about when they're not high. When they're high, they don't read books while they're high because it's a pointless endeavor because they can't remember what happened on the previous page. And I actually experimented with this because as an avid reader myself, I took it as a challenge to be able to prove to my other friends that I could read while I was high and make sense of it and do well on a comprehension test. But it was a useless endeavor on my part. So
okay. So let's actually transition then from, so the effect of marijuana is isolating.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say the effect of alcohol is in a community setting?
Same thing if you're drunk. Because I used to bartend, and one of the problems with bartending, and you've bartended as well, especially if you bartend in a party place, after hours, the only way really to handle drunk people without just becoming incredibly frustrated is to be drunk yourself. Because drunk people live in their own world. They operate within their own sphere. And for the most and so when you're sober and you're dealing with a drunk person, it's incredibly frustrating because you communicate with them. You can't have any sort of normal image-bearing communion with them because they have become isolated in their own cocoon of individualism. And so drunk.
But there is a community aspect though in Christian life for alcohol. I mean, you went straight from marijuana to being drunk, and we are drawing this correlation, this connection between. We're saying they're in fact equal, being high and being drunk. But so we're making the claim that you can't smoke marijuana in a certain instant, right? So in a night you're smoking pot, you're going to get high. That's how it is. That's what you do it for.
If not, you wasted your money.
Right. But in a given night, you can have several beers. You're not getting wasted.
Yeah.
How does drinking in community look? If you smoke pot in community, you end up isolated. If you drink in community as a Christian, what happens?
Well, before the point of diminishing returns, when you're drinking, like with music or with art or with a discussion about a good book or a good movie, you're entering into an aesthetic experience. That it's a communal experience. So like when you and I, when we share a beer together, we're entering into something beautiful that reflects who God is, and it encourages us to engage on that thing. But if we were to continue drinking that beer until the point where we're both inebriated, we've got to the point where we can't communicate with each other on a deep level, on a communal level. So drinking good beer or good wine is a way to commune with each other over God's good gifts.
Okay, so I would love right now, so the comments are flying thick and fast. We're having trouble keeping up with them.
Yeah.
I encourage you guys to tweet at us because I would love to deal with some specific questions. So you can tweet me at Joffrey the Giant. You can tweet John at A Day in His Court.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe send your questions, and we'd love to field some questions straight to us. Mark does want us to know that his wife says that he listens better when he smokes, which is not often. So apparently he's more pliant and pliable, but I think we would have expected that.
There's also the point then, Mark, then what does that say about how terrible of a listener you are when you're not smoking?
Right, exactly. So let me ask you about an argument that I've heard that Christians make. I actually encountered this for the first time last year, so it was recent for me. But apparently this is a tried and true argument, I think mostly amongst, how should I put this? I'm not going to put it because I just want to insult people. So this is the argument.
Mm-hmm.
God made every plant for us.
Yeah.
Okay? I'll try to find the exact phrasing in Genesis. Mm-hmm. The pot smokers I know can quote it. So, but I'll let you start tackling that now. If God made marijuana, why would it be bad to indulge? Now, here's the subtlety to the argument. So the argument here is that only dosage makes things evil, right? Beer is good, but drinking too much alcohol is bad, right? There's arsenic in apple seeds. Dosage is what makes things bad, but there is nothing in this world, nothing, that is harmful in the right dosages. And perhaps you could even argue everything is good in the right dosages. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that I've heard that many, many times from 8th graders in classrooms.
So you can do the insulting.
Cool. I mean, we would go into the classrooms, and one of the things you would always count on someone saying was, marijuana is natural. It grows naturally. Well, I mean, heroin comes from the poppy plant. I mean, how are you going to draw lines? Gasoline is natural. Oil is it doesn't mean you want to drink it. I mean,
yeah, but the line is in the dosage. They're saying that that this is the line, that it's dosage.
How do they know what the line is?
So I mean, through assiduous research, of course. Smoke pot until you find exactly what the right non-harmful dosage is. Do heroin until you have.
Sergeant Mantis wrote, "God made ISIS. There are better arguments than God did it."
Right, and that actually is exactly. I mean, my counter to that argument is, that's before the fall anyway. Yeah. Why would you even trot that out when if Christians believe that the world has fallen and that creation itself groans in eager expectation of the coming of Christ? So I mean, if tigers and rivers and trees are all broken because of us, why shouldn't we expect that poppies and marijuana plants and us wouldn't be broken either? It's it makes now if you want to make an argument that you will be smoking pot in the resurrection in the heavenly city, then please do. But don't start talking to me about after the fall.
I hope so. I hope that that's true. But okay, here's my response to adults who would come up to me and say that about God made weed. It's about dosage. Blah blah blah. I would say, okay, fine. What dosage level then is okay? And why do you say it's okay? Because whether you agree or disagree with me, I have a standard that I'm taking from God's holy word that's being characterized by drunkenness. Drunkenness is out of bounds for a Christian. And I believe, and this is not something that because I believe this from experience, and I also know this from study, that smoking marijuana puts you in a state of inebriation. And so whether you agree with my line or not, I at least am drawing my line based on a standard that's external to myself. So if you say it's all about dosage, okay, what is that dosage and how did you reach that point? I don't understand this concept of dosage with drugs, with marijuana. It's not like beer and scotch that you can drink for the deliciousness of it and never get to the drunk part.
Right, and I think deliciousness is a really important point in this. And I actually wrote an article about how, tell me that pot is delicious, and I'll take a softer stance. Sorry, go ahead.
The better tasting the pot, the weed, the quicker you're going to get high. Because the danker, the danker the chronic, the better it is, the quicker you're going to get high. the stuff that doesn't taste good, the dried out brick swag, that you don't like the flavor of it because it's bitter, it's harsh. It takes more to get high. So it's like with beer, good beer, the flavor of it doesn't affect, for the most part. And I understand that stouts are going to have a higher ABV, but for the most part, a good flavorful beer, just because it's flavorful, that doesn't mean that you're going to get high quicker. But if somebody brings me weed and it's really has a really great pungent odor to it and a pungent taste to it, I'm happy because I know that I can smoke less of it for a high.
Okay, so let me. We've got a couple of good comments coming in about intent. Okay, so I want to read you a couple of these comments after I flip the camera to see me. Okay, there we go. All right, so I want the first comment I read to you to shade the second comment. Okay, so the first comment is from Tim D, and he says, "I think artistic enhancement, the artistic enhancement effect is way more intense with smoking grass than drinking. Smoking at art shows, movies, concerts, etc., go hand in hand." So there's the intent of improving. We can talk about that with psychedelic drugs as well, improving a. Sorry, I got distracted by comments about technical stuff. Improving an aesthetic experience. So that's intent. Now let's talk about intent as well with this question specifically. Michael Hansen asked the question on Twitter. Everything is good when it is used for its intended purpose. Perhaps you all could talk about marijuana's medical uses. Would you care to tackle that? We can talk about medical use more specifically, or we can talk about intent more generally.
I didn't go into it in the article, but I implied it several times. I am 100% behind smoking marijuana for medicinal purposes. There's one thing I did talk about in the article, and this is actually something that is incredibly important to me and that means something to me. When adults talk about drugs, when they demonize marijuana in the same breath that they demonize, say, cocaine or heroin, they're doing a huge disservice to their kids. This was not to excuse my own choices, but this is one of the things that I faced in my late teens, early 20s, when all of a sudden I found myself in this culture. I had been taught this whole time that cocaine, marijuana, same thing, and so you do one, you might as well do the other, and that's not true. So I'm a firm proponent of medical marijuana. It makes no sense to me whatsoever that somebody who has glaucoma or somebody who has stomach cancer isn't allowed by the federal government to smoke marijuana, but they're allowed to take narcotics. It makes absolutely zero sense to me. So yes, I am 100% for the use of medical marijuana, and I make that point in the article, even though it's not explicit.
Okay, so that raises a question for me, and that is, okay, well, we accept the use of narcotics in easing people's.
Okay, hold on, 1 second.
Yeah.
I got this. Tim D says all kinds of different tasting strains of cannabis. Taste does not directly relate to the THC levels. This guy better start citing some of his claims. Tim D, I appreciate the comment. I never said that it directly relates to the THC level. But if you are a pot smoker, you know this. If somebody brings you dried swag, and please respond to this in the comments section. If somebody brings you dried brick swag, what does it taste like as opposed to chronic? I'll wait for your answer.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the question here is, so we accept as a society the use of these narcotics to not only dull pain, but really, I mean, it's, depending on the dosage of the drug and how severe your condition is, a constant state of what you could call drunkenness or a constant high. So you don't want, okay, so you approve of the use of marijuana with that, not necessarily the use of narcotics. You think it's kind of difficult, okay, but there also seems to introduce a slippery slope into, well, if we've already said that getting high is bad, why would getting high just because you're in pain be good? I mean, at that point, you almost need to open the door to something like euthanasia, right? So I'm in so much pain from my cancer that I must smoke pot and sin by getting high. Is that what we've been saying? And if it is, then even that pain is not acceptable, or this pain must be endured. Or perhaps it opens the door to saying, well, it's okay because I'm going to die and I'm in so much pain for you to put me out of my misery.
Okay, well, that's speaking of slippery slopes, you could make that
Yes.
same argument for even over-the-counter drugs. And as I said in the
Okay,
argument,
and I just want to interrupt you for just a second and say, I know that was kind of an unfair question. Just throwing it at you, see how
no,
you
I don't,
see
I don't
what
think
happens.
I don't think it's an unfair question. I think that it's something that has to be that needs to be interacted with. Because if you go for heart surgery, and the doctor prescribes you pain pills afterwards, I don't know of any Orthodox, Reformed believers. I'm sure there are some, but I don't know any who's going to say it's a sin to partake of those, even though there's a point, even though not a point, you are getting high off of those painkillers, those narcotics the doctor is prescribing to you. But it comes down to intent as well. I mean, why are you taking those pills? What's the purpose of them? And if I come home from the hospital and I've just had surgery, I'm going to have a hard time interacting with my family appropriately if I'm in such a pain that I can't think straight. Yeah, I'm distracted the same way you are.
Yeah, the talker needs to stay focused.
Yeah. Sorry. Maybe I should hide that. In terms of I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I don't claim to be, but I do know that there are medical benefits for smoking marijuana for certain types of, like if somebody with stomach cancer, or even with AIDS, who can't keep food down, it helps with their appetite. So the positive gains outweigh whatever negative. And like I said, if you go back and read my article, and I hope that the people who are commenting do, I never once say, in fact, I said the opposite, that getting drunk is necessarily a sin. So
Yes.
getting high isn't necessarily a sin. A lot of it comes down to context. And if you're dying or if you're really sick and you need these medicines, whether it be marijuana or Percocet or Loratab or whatever, if you need these medicines to help you interact appropriately with the people God has placed in your life, then I think you should use those drugs. I don't understand the debate about medical marijuana, to be honest with you, because most people who are opposed to it are happy taking, Percocets if the doctor prescribes them for them.
Okay, so I do want to just drop a comment. Sergeant Mantis, thank you for your comments. I appreciate them. We don't want to unpack that particular comment that people are interacting with now fully, because that will completely derail the video. It's a great question, but if we tackle that head on, we'll end up making a video about something else entirely. The problem of evil itself. So that'll be a little too deep for us. We got a little comment. Let's see. It looks like someone is texting me comments. Let's see. Look at that. Yes.
Is it Chris White?
No. It's a guy named Mike Oxlong. Had to text me. Doesn't know how to do it on YouTube. Let's see what we got here. All right, I'm just going to read this whole thing and we can interact with it, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Having a puff or two of pot makes me happy or euphoric, the same as a pint or two would. Smoking a bowl or a full joint gets me intoxicated, just as drinking all night at a rapid pace would. With 20 years' experience, I would say I'm smoking to get euphoric, not intoxicated, just as some of you drink for the high and not the intoxication that comes with overindulgence. I see a definite destination, which is a great word because we've been talking about intent. I see a definite destination. Oh, it's not a great word. It's autocorrect. He means distinction. I see a definite distinction between smoking to get a happy buzz and overindulging and being intoxicated by weed. And I think some of that is what we've been saying the whole time. Would you care to interact with that?
I was somewhat distracted by Tim D's response to my challenge. I guess it's a response. But in regards to that, look, what was his name? What was the guy's name?
Mike.
I mean, if you go back and read the article, I hope that it's obvious that I'm not making a hard and fast certain rule that my experience or my understanding of weed applies to each and every person. I'll be honest with you, if somebody tells me they only take a couple of puffs, Chris White, I'm just watching, not texting. If I only take a couple of puffs just to make me happy, I'm going to be honest with you, Mike, and I hope this doesn't offend you. without knowing you, I'm going to assume that you're still high, and that goes back to my first point that high equals drunk. Um, and no, the thing is that I mean, look at me. I look like a pothead. You don't necessarily have to know my past. I mean, you could probably look at me and know and realize that I've had my go-arounds with weed, so I know what I'm talking about in this. And so Tim D writes, I live in Florida, good locally grown cannabis. Well, yes, the climate. I grew up in Florida. A few friends are daily smokers. It's never dry swag. Can he capitalize never? Well, okay, bully for them. I mean, they're not wasting their money then. Keeps getting better and better. These folks don't keep smoking more and more. I never said you keep smoking more and more. I actually said you have to smoke less. You actually get to smoke less of it, the better it is. Dry brick swag, and if you go to the article, there's actually a picture about 3/4 of the way down that has chronic right next to swag to show the difference. Dry brick swag is not worth smoking if you smoke a lot of weed.
Okay,
The better the weed, the more chronic it is, the more flavor it's going to have, the less you're going to have to smoke to get high. And that's a fact.
so we're getting a little bit distracted from the main point of that part of the discussion, which is that we are making
Yes,
the
that's
claim.
stereotyping Ryu Chan. They're potheads.
Dude, you are all over these comments. So we've been making the claim that you smoke pot in order to get high, but you do not drink beer in order to get drunk. We realize it's a slippery slope. We have a lot of people talking about, well, I have 2 or 3 beers, I have 1 cigarette, I don't even know what they're called, but 1 joint.
One.
Thank you. So what's a roach?
A roach is essentially once you smoke a joint down to the very end, that's what's called the roach. And you can, and I reference this in the article, I don't explain it, but if you can scrape out the tar in the roach, it takes several roaches to do a 2nd generation joint, and the high is even better. And then if you save enough of the 2nd generation joints, you can do a 3rd generation joint. I assume you could do 4th generation joints, but I never had that much patience.
Okay, so we have a lot of people responding, well, you know, I have 2 or 3 beers, I feel a little buzzed. So we recognize that's a slippery slope in a gray area, but we are making the claim that you can drink beer, wine, whiskey for the pleasure of it, but you don't do that with pot. Well, I say pleasure, I mean the flavor and that delight. But the delight of pot lies strictly in the high, in the drunkenness. But that actually leads to, we have a guy named Ryu Chan who has mentioned a couple of times alternative ways of ingesting. So eating pot. And that kind of leads to, I wrote an article, which I posted a link to below this video, about flavor.
Yeah.
You know, so marijuana as a food, as a condiment, as a flavor enhancer, is that even possible? Is there any reason you would put pot in brownies? Like, would you put pot in brownies if it didn't
Edibles?
make you high? Cannabis, pardon.
No, I wouldn't. There would be no reason to, and that's the anybody who eats edible, they're called edibles. And like if you go to San Francisco, if you go to the Golden Gate Park, you can get edibles for free. There are ganja lollipops that the hippies there will pass out to you. Sometimes, and I never experienced when I lived in San Francisco. I never experienced this myself, but I was told this by many people around the country who knew that sometimes the growers from up in Northern California, from their Arcadia region, would bring bags of the stems, the swag that we've been talking about, and just leave the bags out for anybody to take. So, but in terms of the edibles, yes, I will say this: I shouldn't say any. The vast majority of people who partake in edibles, if they don't get high from putting marijuana in their brownies, they're not going to bother to do it because there's not any reason to do it. Like the ganja lollipops. The ganja lollipops don't taste that great, but you're not eating them for the flavor. You're eating them to get high.
Right, because the ganja lollipops are not actually delicious, whereas Scotch whiskey is delicious. And if you don't think it is, no one argues that the guy who says that it is thinks that it is. Or only fools do, right? I mean, you might not like Scotch whiskey, but this guy over here, it really is delicious for him. Now, The alcohol is a part of the experience. The alcohol actually makes it taste better. But then, I mean, it's certainly the effect, the physiological effect alcohol has, is a desirable thing, and the Bible makes that clear. But it is an actual, drinking is a flavorful experience. It is sensual in many more ways than. I mean, pot is not sensual at all. It's strictly, I would say, it's strictly a high effect. It's just the drunkenness.
Okay. Yeah, not to ignore that, but Steve Owitz says some of the THC food is good. Well, look. Okay, once again, we're not saying it isn't, but if you don't get seriously, Steve, wow, the comments are coming so fast. I lost his name. Steve Owitz, if you don't get high, if you put THC in edibles and you don't get high from it, are you going to partake of it, especially at the price that it's offered at? I don't think that anybody who says that they're going to eat pot brownies simply because it has pot in it, even if it doesn't make them high, I don't think that they're being completely honest. They're just trying, and I know this is probably offensive, but anyone who says that, they're really just trying to excuse why they're eating edibles.
I think that's right, and actually, that's what's really. I actually kind of have the same thought for Christians who like to drink a lot, but they're drinking Bud Light. Like, I know. I mean, I can't formally charge you, but I know that you're not drinking that Bud Light because it's delicious.
Yeah.
There's only one reason you could drink it. There's only one reason you can smoke pot. So let's. We've been talking for an hour, so let's do this to close up. Let's have, as if we were debating the world. Why don't you have some like a closing statement, something you'd really like to say? Then also we'll use that time to give kind of a final opportunity for people to drop questions or provocative comments, and we'll field one or two of those and close things up. So you guys, Twitter is the best place right now to drop questions, at Joffrey the Giant, or you can just comment in the video as you guys are doing now. Drop your burning questions. Don't make them repeats. We're going to do something that's unique and new, and then I'll hand it over to you, Don.
All right. In terms of closing comments and what I want to say, I mean, I would encourage you, as self-serving as this is, to read my article about it. If you tell me that you smoke weed on a regular basis, even I'm not really going to judge you. I may have some questions for you personally. My purpose in this discussion, in this article, is to provide some thoughts and some basis for some people who don't have the experience or necessarily the understanding of how marijuana works or what it is, to be able to navigate these issues. Because the reality is that as the laws continue to be overturned that prohibit the recreational use of marijuana, which, for the record, and if you read the article, I believe that recreational use of marijuana should be legal. I don't believe the U.S. government should make it illegal. My concern is with fellow Christians. So I hope to provide some talking points or some thinking points for fellow believers as they interact with this. By no means, and Mark knows this, who we've picked on some because of his comments. He's a friend of ours. Mark knows this. If you disagree with me on this, I will be more than happy to sit down over a beer with you and talk about this and walk away friends. This isn't a hard and fast rule with me. This isn't like you're out killing babies. If you enjoy smoking weed, I would love to sit down and hear why that's the case. I personally believe that if you think that the Bible's negative attitude and possible strictures against being drunk are serious, I'm curious as to how you justify then smoking marijuana when there's really no reason, there is no reason outside of medicinal purposes to smoke marijuana except for getting high/drunk.
Okay, so we have a comment from Sergeant Mantis, and it starts provocatively. It says, "Oh, I've got a question. New research shows that marijuana is much less damaging than alcohol. What does that mean for Christians when science says it is safer?" I want to answer that one, John. My answer can be summed up neatly It could definitely be unpacked, and I would love to do another video on this. But to sum it up most neatly, you should get on YouTube, as you are now, and search Nacho Libre baptism scene. Search Nacho Libre baptism scene. That will sum up my answer to that question. All right, and then we have. Go ahead.
Can I say something real quick to that, Sergeant Manis? If you read the
hold on. Before you add anything, I want you to admit that whatever answer you have is not as elegant as mine.
Nothing I ever say is ever as elegant as you, John.
Okay, there we are.
Sergeant Manis, if you read my article, there's a very short paragraph where I actually say that if you live in I figured how I worded it. If you live in the capital of false dichotomies, smoking marijuana, being a pothead is physically preferable to being an alcoholic. Yeah, you will never get me to say that being a drunkard in terms of alcohol is better than being a pothead. I would not say that goes back to what I was saying about conversations about drugs with children. We have to make sure that we're careful about how we categorize things and that we're being honest about things. As much as I love alcohol and as much as I think that good beer and good wine and good scotch reflect who God is, the reality is that a physical dependency or even a mental dependency, physical dependency on alcohol is one of the worst things that you can do for your body. If you are, there's a point where you can be and alcohol is the only substance that this is the case. You can be so physically dependent on alcohol that the only way to stop doing it, the only safe way to stop drinking is under the supervision of a doctor. There's no other substance that does that. Like heroin. If you're addicted to heroin, when you quit, you may want to die while you're coming off heroin, but you're not going to die. If you're an extreme alcoholic, if you give up alcohol cold turkey, you may very well die. So yes, an alcohol dependency is far worse physically than a marijuana dependency. And I want to make that perfectly clear because that's one of the dangers of these conversations, especially with kids, is that everything gets treated the same, and it's not.
Okay, so I feel like you and I have answered every question every Christian would ever have about personally deciding to smoke weed or not. Guys, thank you so much for interacting. Absolutely fantastic. All these comments. You know, I was pretty excited when John agreed to come on because I knew the comments would be flying. Everyone, all you regulars, all you newbies, thanks for popping by. John?
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, well, you sounded like you were about to say something.
Well, I'm looking at some of the comments about heroin, and that's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're being sidetracked by the commenters. Got a filter.
Are we still
talking
live?
to each other too?
Are we still live?
We are still live, buddy.
Okay, I want to comment on some of those.
Okay.
Sergeant Manis says yes, delirium tremens will kill you. That's DTs from alcohol. Steve Owitt says you can die from heroin. I didn't say you couldn't die from heroin. I said if you stop using heroin, you're not going to die from the withdrawals. There's a difference. Of course you can die from heroin. I don't think people actually listen to what we say sometimes.
That's YouTube right there, and you have to realize these guys are as distracted as we are, if we're being charitable, because they're talking and listening to us. But yeah, that's a perennial problem on the YouTubes. But we're just going to charitably assume that they were distracted by charming conversation amongst themselves.
You're more charitable than I am.
Thanks, dudes. Yeah, I have to be. You know, I have to keep the people
up. This is your channel.
Correct. Yep. You are the guest. You can actually throw grenades down the aisle and make everyone mad, and my ratings will only go up. So you feel free.
Have me over any time to insult your followers. I'll be happy to do so.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Thanks, John, and peace be upon you guys.